Jesus prayed for unity. We are not unified. Is Jesus naive? Does he actually think we could possibly be unified? I wonder if perhaps he knows something that we don't know. The early church faced a major conflict, and we shouldn't underestimate how significant this conflict was. The conflict for which the Jerusalem Council was convened around AD 50 or 51. It was a big deal. The issue was whether Gentile converts to Christianity had to be circumcised and follow Mosaic law in order to be considered full members of the Christian community. Just put yourself into the position of the Jewish Christians. Jesus was a Jewish Messiah. Jesus ushered in a new chapter to the Jewish story. Gentiles can be part of it, but they have to get with the whole program, which they took very seriously. God told them to circumcise their sons, and they knew this story from Exodus 4. On the way to Egypt, Moses stopped at a place to spend the night. The Lord met Moses at that place and tried to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife and circumcised her son. She took the skin and touched his feet. Then she said to Moses, "You are a bridegroom of blood to me." Zipporah said this because she had to circumcise her son so God would let Moses live. God was going to take out Moses, the greatest of Jewish historical figures, because he hadn't circumcised his son. Since then, the Jews have said, well, I guess we better do that then. And the rest of the Mosaic law was pretty important too. Didn't God obliterate the northern kingdom and send the southern kingdom into exile because they didn't obey Mosaic law? Almost the entirety of the Old Testament is what the Mosaic law is and what happens if you don't obey it. By Jesus' day, the Jews had learned their lesson. Get circumcised and obey Mosaic law. So can you understand why Jewish Christians might still think that some of this stuff is important? And now some Christian guys like Paul and Barnabas said that faith in Jesus Christ was sufficient for salvation and that the Gentiles need not follow Jewish customs and practices. Certain people came down from Judea to Antioch and were teaching the believers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom taught by Moses, you cannot be saved. This brought Paul and Barnabas into sharp dispute and debate with them. So Paul and Barnabas were appointed, along with some other believers, to go up to Jerusalem to see the apostles and the elders about this question. How do you think that went down? Well, here's how that went down. Some stood up and said, the Gentiles must be circumcised and are required to keep the law of Moses. So the battle lines are drawn. And don't think that this issue is smaller than what we're facing today. Because if you know the history of it, I think this question was much bigger than anything that we are facing right now. So there was a lot of discussion, as you may suppose. And you know what? They sat down and they talked about it, and they solved it with some compromise, and it changed the shape of the church forever. And we hardly even think about it anymore. They sent their decision in a letter to the churches, and this is what the letter said. It seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us not to burden you with anything beyond the following requirements. You are to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. You will do well to avoid these things. So, a few observations. It seemed good to the Spirit and to us. Seemed? We don't always talk like this nowadays. It seems like the Spirit is a lot clearer today, because people seem to be very clear about what the Holy Spirit wants. Second observation. They compromised. It's all about grace, and here are 3 requirements. Now, do you think the former Pharisees were happy about this? Not a chance. That list of 3 is way too short. Do you think Paul was delighted about this? Certainly not. We know what his position is from this story and everything else he wrote in the New Testament, especially the book of Galatians, which is about this issue. Interesting. Third startling observation. Even though neither side was happy, they submitted to the decision of the elders. And a final observation. The church was not negatively affected by this decision. This list of 3 requirements didn't end up mattering at all. 2 out of the 3 requirements became completely irrelevant. Jesus prayed for unity, and I don't think he was being naive. The story in Acts 15 shows us that it's possible, but we can't continue to go about things the way that we are. Here's what Acts 15 tells us about how to disagree, how to deal with conflict in the church. First, we need to abandon certainty. We might be right, but we might not be, and we might be partially so. Second, we need to be willing to compromise. Third, even if we don't like a decision, we need to submit to what the leadership decides. This is not something we do very easily in this day and age. Tell anyone that they have to submit and they will freak right out. Paul submitted and he knew he was completely in the right. It's a different world, eh? But not for Christians. We should always be acting a little bit more like Paul than the world. Fourth, and probably most importantly, the Spirit really is in all this. Because even if we make a wrong decision, it all gets sorted out by His power. The Bible lets us know what happened because of this decision in the next chapter. As they traveled from town to town, they delivered the decision reached by the apostles and the elders in Jerusalem for the people to obey. So the churches were strengthened in the faith and grew daily in number. That's a pretty good ending to all this. If we apply the lessons from Acts 15 to the conflicts that we find ourselves in, I think we can find the unity that Christ prayed for. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.